Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Andrea Mock. It is Friday, February 10th, and we are going to recap everything that happened today in the courtroom in the double murder trial of Alex Murdaugh. Now, let's start with the last witness today. The last person to take the stand was this gentleman. His name is Nathan Tootin, and he was a close friend of Paul Murdaugh's. Previously, he even worked as a courier for Alex Murdaugh's law firm. Now, Tootin described what jobs Alex would ask him to do while he was in that position.
Buster shotgun, how do you know that?
If I needed to pick up court documents from different law firms or courthouses, drive them depositions, cash checks, that was some of the things.
I'm sorry, you said cash checks?
That's correct.
He had you cash checks for him?
That's correct.
All right, well tell me, where would he send you to cash the checks?
Palmetto State Bank.
And you would take that envelope of cash, and where would you bring it?
Back to his office.
Okay, and just hand it to him.
That's correct.
Okay. How many times did he have you cash checks like that?
Very frequently.
There you go. Be aware of the muzzle.
Well, Tootin also testified that at one time he actually lived on the Moselle property along with Paul. Today he talked about the guns that Paul Murdaugh usually carried with him. Here's what he had to say about that.
Did you know that 300 blackout had been replaced?
I did not.
Okay. Were you aware that the 300 blackout replacement did not have a thermal scope?
If I didn't know about the gun, then no.
Okay. So, do you know whether or not this is Buster's 300 blackout sitting here in the courtroom?
That is the gun that I used at Moselle.
All right, there at the beginning of that testimony, they were talking about that 300 blackout that reportedly was stolen from Paul. Tootin continued to work at that law firm until May of 2022, and he is now actually a police officer with the Walterboro Police Department. All right, let's take you now to another witness this afternoon. A cell phone data expert with the FBI testified. His name was Matthew Wild, and he was tasked with analyzing cell phone location data for Alex, Maggie, and Paul Murdaugh's phones. Wild testified about cell phone tower pings from Alex Murdaugh's phone on the night of the murders.
Here we have a number of calls between 6:40 and 9:10 p.m. and they're all using tower 159263.
And
that's the one shown, which faces north and is consistent with being in the area of the Moselle property. Now we're looking at 912 to 918.
Okay. And in the 912 phone record, where does Alex's cell phone ping? Which sector?
Uses sector 3 on tower 159263, which is the one closest to Moselle property. And just showing that there's a couple little specks of coverage there from this tower and sector.
And again,
on that property.
Which tower is this? This is the tower that's closest to Moselle.
It is, yes.
But you do actually see some actual coverage area right there on
Yes.
the corner. Okay. And the red is right there, correct?
Yes, the red is Moselle.
Next slide. Okay, and here we are. We're zoomed back out. Again, red is Moselle. And this is that tower just down south of Varnville, correct?
It is. So that's the tower south of Varnville, or near Varnville.
All right, well, Wild testified that there was GPS location data from Paul Murdaugh's phone on the day of the murders, but none on Alex or Maggie's phone from that day. Now, also today, a very interesting and at times emotional moment. Jurors got to hear a bit of Maggie's voice for the first time. The Murdaugh family former housekeeper took the stand this afternoon. Blanca Simpson is her name, and she told the jury she worked for the Murdaugh family for years, and she says she considered Maggie a close friend. She talked about text messages she received from Maggie on the day of the murders. Maggie had asked her to go to the house, pick up, and even make dinner.
Had a lot of work that was going on. She told me, she said, Alex wants me to come home. And she kind of sounded like she didn't want to come home. Because she really liked being at Edisto. And they had a lot of work that was going on, and she was trying to make sure everything was ready for the 4th of July gathering that she was planning. So she was very detail orientated, so she wanted everything perfect. So she was kind of, she sounded like she was a little disappointed. And then she said, well, Alec asked Paul to come home too, because he's got to fix the mess up out there that that CB had done.
All right, also today, things got a little bit heated between the prosecution and the defense attorneys during Simpson's testimony. Dick Harpootlian objected to a line of questioning from John Meadors where they asked Simpson if Maggie Murdaugh was concerned about money. Here's more on that.
When Maggie closed the door,
Hearsay.
Response.
Judge, I think, was she anxious about money issues?
Your Honor, I object to.
Well, I know you objected, and
But he is.
I understand your objection. Well, I don't care what you're doing. There's an objection to the previous question. The objection is sustained.
He said before Your Honor ruled, was she concerned about money or wasn't she concerned about money? He testified, which is to hearsay. I would move for mistrial.
All right, Judge Clifton Newman actually did overrule that objection. So let's get down to business and talk a little bit about everything we saw today. Taylor Bell is with us now, a defense attorney, to talk about the witnesses and break it down. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
All right, let's go back to the beginning. I want to talk about the Blanca Simpson testimony. Now, for the jurors, I felt like as somebody that's been following the case, this is the first time we really got to hear Maggie's voice in court and hear a bit of something in her own words. We heard her text messages, and also I want your reaction. She told the jurors that the text said that Alec had asked both Maggie and Paul to be down in Moselle on June 7th. What do you think the jury takeaway from that will be?
I'm not sure what the takeaway is exactly. You can cut it both ways. From the perspective of the prosecution, I think that the prosecution is trying to show that maybe Alec lured them there,
right?
That he had this planned. However, the other side is Alec just had a bad day. He'd had a bad day. He'd found out about, I believe, there were issues with the money, and maybe he was going to tell them about that too. So that's the other side of it, that maybe he was there to have a family dinner and have a conversation about that. So, you know, I don't know how to take that necessarily yet until the end.
All right, let's make another point. I thought it was fascinating that both the prosecution and the defense made points to talk about the very next day. So Simpson testified that Alec called her the next day, told her that they had died, and then invited her to come over to the house and asked her to go start picking things up. Well, then they made a point, both the prosecution and the defense, of the fact that she was allowed in the house. It was an active crime scene, and they let her in the house to start picking up items that included clothing and khaki pants. What did you make of that?
So I took it also from the defense side that Alec didn't want back in that residence to start with. I think that's something to pick up on as well, that he didn't want to be there, maybe for emotional reasons. So that's the first thing I thought about when I heard that. In terms of her being allowed in the house, that shows to me that maybe the crime scene was not secured, and that SLED and investigators that were there had not properly searched for clothing, not searched the bathroom. I think a lot was made of the bathroom,
yes.
About a pair of pants, about a shirt. They talked about whether or not, down the road, I think she talked about whether there was a shirt there or not there, whether she remembered it being there, and then the pants, and having washed the pants the next day, that they could have been the pants that he wore in a Snapchat video. So it kind of cut both ways for the sides, that the defense was able to show that law enforcement had not secured the scene, and it also, I think, prosecution tried to show that there's clothes that are missing.
And she did, as a matter of fact, go ahead when Creighton Waters asked her and say that she had never seen that shirt again, and she wasn't sure if she had seen those pants again. But on that point about what the prosecution was doing, many of their critics have said they're sort of putting the dots on the wall, but not coming back with the marker and connecting the dots. I think it went a little bit that way today with the testimony about the clothing. We heard, just like you said, that there was a t-shirt that was taken from the closet and fell on the floor. We heard about the pants. We heard about Maggie's pajamas being laid out in an odd spot that they weren't normally, but then the prosecution never went back and sort of connected the dots for the jury. Did you feel that way watching it, or did you feel that the point that the prosecution was trying to make about the clothes was clear?
So I think if you're sitting from the jury's perspective here, that they're catching on to a little bit of that. The witnesses are the evidence that they're putting in. Sometimes it doesn't come very clear. They just have to get that evidence in so that they can talk about it in closing. Down the road, maybe 2 weeks from now, they're going to put all the dots together, I imagine. I imagine they're going to have a timeline that's going to have data from all the cell phones. They're going to have a timeline from the car. They're going to have a timeline from the witnesses' statements of when they saw Alec, when they saw Paul, when they saw Maggie. And they're going to have a big timeline that they're going to go through and try to eliminate all other possibilities except for Alec. That's what I think they're going to do at the end. Right now, they're kind of focused on getting the evidence in. While looking at it from the outside, it does look a bit discombobulated, I guess would be a word, in that it's kind of sporadic. And I do believe they are choosing witnesses to put in kind of in a sporadic manner. They're not all, but I think they're trying to chronologically tell a story as well.
All right, certainly. And now next on the stand was Miss Belinda Rast. She was not on the stand for a very long time. I think the first thing that jurors would have heard if they were paying attention is that not only was she a Murdaugh employee, she actually still is a Murdaugh employee. She is still actively caring for Miss Libby, Alex's mom, and she testified that it was unusual that in all the time she had worked, about 5 years, Alec had only stopped by at night 6 to 7 times because she said Miss Libby goes to bed at 8 o'clock. She was not on the stand for a long time. That was really one of the only big points she made. What do you think the jury took away from that?
Well, I think that they were prosecution was trying to show that it was unusual. However, I think she also mentioned that Alec was there more than anyone else. So I kind of was conflicted there. Well, how do you know if he's there more than anyone else if you only work in the evenings? But he doesn't come there, and it's unusual for him to come in the evening. So I was kind of conflicted with that portion.
You're right. That was a bit contradictory. And she is actually another one of the people who I thought there was a very sweet moment when she was talking about Paul and about the relationship that Paul had with her grandmother. I think all the jurors probably, it tugged on their hearts for a bit when she was talking about Paul visiting a lot and bringing Miss Libby ice cream.
Yeah. Well, I think Paul being the youngest is kind of, still the baby of the family. And so I think there's probably some heartfelt moments that she got to see between the youngest of the family and the elders.
All right, moving on. Then we had Matthew Wild, who was an FBI agent, and this was the testimony. He stood up. There was a chart. We couldn't see the chart. I know y'all watching on YouTube couldn't see the chart either. And he was talking about cell phone pings. Let me ask you this, because a lot of us were talking about this in our newsroom. We had already heard the testimony from Britt Dove, the SLED agent, talking about the steps on their cell phones and where the steps were. So we basically already had gotten the testimony about where Alec and Maggie and Paul were and their movements and their steps on the night of June 7th. Why was this necessary, and what was it you think prosecution was trying to show with Mr. Wild?
So I think that they're trying to show the cell phone. So towers work a little bit differently than GPS locations. Towers, I think newer towers are around 10-mile span, and they're in sectors. There's 3 sectors to every cell phone tower. And they're directional. So you can kind of tell where somebody is traveling along a route if they're in a car and as they're making phone calls by what tower
It's
connecting
connecting to or
to,
pinging with, sure.
and in what angle it's connecting to. So I think they're trying to. I think there's mentioning of a possible suspect by Alec at some point in conversation with SLED agents, and part of his testimony from Wild was to eliminate that suspect that Alec had mentioned. I think that was part of it, as well as I think it was kind of to narrow down timeframes as well. As I said, I think it's all going to come down to a timeline at the end that's going to be laid out to try to eliminate all possible suspects except for Alec.
And that was CB, who worked on the Moselle property, and they asked if CB's phone had pinged anywhere near the property that night, and Mr. Wild testified no, it had not. All right, let's move on to our final witness of the day, Nathan Tootin. This is an interesting witness for me. Now, he is testified that he was Paul's friend. He was very close with the family. He's now a Walter Borough police officer. He seemed to be a bit hostile, though. Anybody that thought that this was going to come up as a defense witness, to me, he seemed not so happy to be answering questions from the defense, it seemed. What did you take away from his testimony?
Well, I took away that he worked for, he had previously worked there for Alec, and that now he is in law enforcement. I think he was very uncomfortable because he was now in law enforcement, whereas he'd previously been an employee. I think part of him wanted to distance himself from liking Alec at some point in time, but I believe he did. And I think he didn't want to answer those types of questions. I think there was an objection relating to there being another law enforcement officer in a room trying to maybe some type of improper payments or something. It's some kind of objection
envelopes.
About that.
There was an objection about some envelopes and some payments of cash that were perhaps being dropped off around another police officer.
Yes. But, he also testified as being a family friend, I believe, as well, and testified to Paul liking guns, which, Miss Simpson, the house, the caretaker house, the housekeeper, she had testified about Paul leaving guns laying around. And that kind of went to the whole theory about there are guns around this house. Guns are regularly used. And so it wouldn't be surprising if a gun had gone missing because they got that Paul had lots of guns.
Sure. Okay, I know we're talking about today's testimony, but I have to talk about yesterday's witness that I pulled on my heartstrings, and I think everybody else watching, Tony Satterfield. Now, we had heard him testify, of course, when he was getting qualified as a witness. So those of us who were watching on YouTube, again, all of y'all watching on our WLTX YouTube channel had seen him testify already. But to me, at least, that was very powerful testimony because I think it is one thing to tell the jurors that Alec had allegedly stolen from his law firm, stolen from some of his partners, stolen from other lawyers. But this was different because Alec is accused of this is preying on the weak to me. So this was a completely different type of testimony. Him saying, of course, that he had to find out in the media that his mom, Gloria Satterfield, the former housekeeper at Moselle who died at the property in an accident, they had been awarded $4 million. And yet Alec was still texting, we're working on it. What do you think the impact is of a witness like that? Where, listen, if you don't understand the cell phone pings and you don't understand the graphs, you understand that basic human emotion of a young fellow who had lost his mom.
Yeah, he's one of those witnesses that you felt for. He has an adult disabled or intellectually disabled brother that he cares for. It's one of those that, you hope that as a defense attorney, if your client committed this theft, it's that you hope that they don't let that cloud the jury's mind that, he's just a bad person, so we should convict him.
Right.
That's how it's damaging for the defense in that perspective. And for the prosecution, they're wanting to show that. They're wanting to show that he'll prey on anybody. And it is sad. It is very sad that, these boys lost their mother and that, Alec had taken everything that was in an insurance policy of his. It's sad that level of, deceit and theft from that population in our society is terrible. And the prosecution got their point across with that.
All right, last question. At the end of last week, we were sitting here, we were talking, and we didn't have any of the none of the financial accusations had been brought up in front of the jury. Now we've had an entire week of financial accusations that was presented in front of the jury. How do you think the prosecution did with that testimony this week?
Well, I think the jury might have gotten a little bored of it at some point.
Right.
Because I think they all, after a couple witnesses, realized, all right, this guy stole money,
Mm-hmm.
stole a lot of money. He stole a lot of money from everybody, but we're not here, for financial crimes. We're here for a murder.
Sure.
So show us why y'all believe he committed this murder. So that's what I took from it. I've never sat in the seats of a juror, so I don't know what they took from it. There were reports that some of the jurors, were not necessarily paying attention, seemed to be looking down, yawning, looking away when they were questioning these witnesses. As I've said before, these witnesses also were very close to Alec, and so they were able to, from the defense side, they were able to pull out information that Alec cared for his family a lot. Might not have cared for the people that he stole from, but he cared for his family a lot, and that was good for the defense. So I think it opened up that a little bit as well.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm remembering the testimony of his paralegal, who I remember her last name was Griswold, but she said, yeah, every time, like if there was a call, he would step out. If she said it didn't matter what the meeting was, he would step out and take the phone call from his family. So we did get to hear that this week coming out of the financial testimony. All right, last question. What are you looking forward to in the coming week?
The coming week, so I think they said that testimony from the state's going to end on the 15th is what they've said. I am interested still in some of the technical evidence relating to medical reports, the stippling. I'm looking at, kind of where the entry wounds were. We've not gotten a whole bunch of that. We've gotten some fact witnesses as to what they saw when they arrived on scene. But let's get some diagrams up where we're going to see where the entry wounds are, what the actual cause of death were. That's what I'm looking forward to from the state. I'm also very interested in the experts from the defense. I'm interested to see who they call to combat. One of the points that was made today by Mr. Harpootlian was the service, the cell service at the property. I'm interested to see if any of their experts come in and say, yes, but this might not be accurate because of this cell service. I don't know. That was a point that he drew out from the housekeeper. He also drew it out. I don't remember the other witnesses, but it was two witnesses that he I think drew that information out from, that had been down at the kennels, that had also been at the house there on the property, that there were particular spots where you had to go. So do we know if those times were accurate? Because it might not have gone through until a later period of time, if you've ever had your phone and tried to send a message and it won't go through.
Right.
So I'm interested to see if there's any testimony related to that from the defense.
All right. Well, certainly it will be a big week. Attorney Taylor Bell, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And of course, you can make sure to go ahead and download the WLTX Plus app, or you can watch our streaming coverage on YouTube. And of course, always check out WLTX.com.